Morning, everybody. Welcome. I've just got a bit overexcited with the clicker already. It's the morning. What could possibly go wrong? Right, so welcome. I'm Holly Cummins. He's not here, but this talk was co-written with Martijn Verburg, so I always want to include him and give him credit, because I think probably many of you know him. He's a Devoxx regular, also very active in the London Java community, and in particular sort of a main shepherd of Adopt a JSR. So my day job is with IBM. I'm from the Cloud Garage. We're like a startup within IBM. There's a network of 14 of us worldwide, and we focus on innovation and allowing people to use lean startup, extreme programming, design thinking to solve problems in new ways. I should say as well, we are hiring, and we have garages in Copenhagen and in Munich, which are somewhat close to here. So if any of you are local to those, do have a look. In the garage, one of the things that we've developed that we're really pleased with is what we call the garage method. And that's a combination of practices, many of them familiar, like lean, like extreme programming, but a combination of them in ways that we know works really well. And one of the key things in the garage method is a fun work environment. And so what that means is that I am actually a professional fun haver, because I am guiding the implementation of the method, and fun is an important part of the method. So far, so good. But I can see there's a lot of you here, and I suspect that part of the reason that there's so many of you here is because it's the last day of the conference, and you're all a bit tired. Some of you are probably a bit hungover, and you thought this was going to be a fun talk, because surely it's got to be more fun than the others, right? Well, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you, which is that this is not a fun talk. It's a talk about fun. So those two things are clearly quite different. Some of you may have been a bit confused, if so, sorry. So fun is really, really important. And because it's important, we've got to take it seriously. So what that means is we've got to be systematic about how we have fun. And we've got to be controlled in how we have fun. And we've got to have a plan for having fun. And we've got to have metrics for fun. So the 20-step plan for having fun. Step 1, quantify and qualify your fun metrics. Now, you're probably not going to be able to do this on your own as a team organically. You need some leadership here. So you need to create a chief fun officer role. That will be your CFO. That may cause a bit of confusion with your other CFO, but they can just fight it out in an alley. Again, this is all about fun. So what you need to do is you need to gamify your daily tasks to make them more fun. And you need to create a culture of fun. And so that means every time someone has fun, you need to high-five them and say, well done, you've achieved our fun goal. And the CFO can be monitoring and gathering the metrics for this. You want to create a fun office environment. We find one of the best ways to do this is to install a fun ball pit. And again, your chief fun officer can monitor the usage of the ball pit. If the ball pit isn't being used enough, then they can start to look at, corrective measures. It's about how we communicate. We need to communicate in a fun way. So again, one thing that you can do that we've found works really well is you choose a fun word each day. It could be something like octopus or squirrel, and you want to work that into as many of your conversations as possible. So for example, I notice that the build has broken and there seems to be an octopus in the pipeline. And at that point, your chief fun officer can then gather the metrics, see that you're using the word of the day correctly, and report that upwards. You want to express fun in your personal style as well. Wear fun clothing. What about wearing a banana suit to the office? That creates fun. And the chief fun officer, again, can be gathering the metrics on this. How many people today turned up in banana suits? If it's more than last week, we're on the right track. If it's less than last week, maybe we need to put in place some corrective fun measures. Again, you want to create a reward system. So create fun certificates. If you can see that people are having fun correctly and properly, then you can give them the fun certificates with the gold stars, because everybody knows incentives create value. And again, finally, it's all about having fun, laughing out loud, But make sure to measure how often you're laughing out loud, because otherwise, if you laugh and it doesn't get measured, maybe it doesn't count. So I want to stop there, because I have had a bad experience with this slide, which is that it got photographed and it got tweeted, and some context got lost along the way. And so then the next thing I knew, I looked on Twitter and I could see all these people saying, those people from IBM, it just goes to show everything we knew about IBM. Look, they can't even have fun properly. Look, this is their approach to having fun. So I should say, if you do tweet this, please add the context, which is that this is not how to have fun. This is how to destroy fun. Fun is important, but this is the wrong approach. But it's easy to see how these kinds of things can happen, because fun has value, but it's quite different to a lot of the other things that we do that have value. So how many of you have your employer is paying for you to come to Devoxx? Show of hands? Yep, most of you, awesome. Now, how many of you, when you made the case to your employers, picked out a couple of particular talks where you said, you see, it's this Kubernetes talk I need to go to. That's going to be really valuable for us. Or, look, functional programming, we need to get more depth there. Show of hands? None. Okay. I guess that's just the thing about Devoxx, isn't it? Every talk is so good. But in particular, so this next one, I think if none of you chose a particular talk, then in particular, probably none of you would have chosen the talk on fun. But even if you had been, giving your boss, here's my top 3 talks that I need to go see at Devoxx, you almost certainly wouldn't have put the fun one in. Even if that was actually the talk you wanted to go see, you would have said to your boss, oh, well, I need to go learn about Kubernetes, and, there may be a fun talk that I'm going to go to, but that's just on my side. I'll do that on my own time. I'm going to be learning about Kubernetes, on your Euro. Because the thing is, fun still is, something that we feel a bit uncomfortable talking about in a business context. So this is not my LinkedIn profile, because on my actual LinkedIn profile, there's no way I'd say having fun at work, even though I'm now speaking about fun, and I've got a blog about fun, and I still feel a little bit like, well, maybe that's not something that should be on my LinkedIn profile. So in fact, that's my LinkedIn profile without the fun. And it's the same when we write a CV. There's these powerful words that we should be using in our cover letter, like, I was innovative and I built this and I introduced this and I strengthened that. And you'll notice that fun is conspicuously absent from this. No one's going to write a CV and say, oh, well, I'm really fun-loving. You want me in your team. Even though, actually, if you're fun-loving, that probably will be a benefit for the team. So we sort of have this fun as this dirty little secret where, we kind of think it's good, we quite like it, but we don't talk about it. So why is that? Well, sort of what's special about fun compared to other things? So I live in hope that someday someone's going to laugh when I show this slide. And it's never happened yet. But fun means jokes, and jokes mean fun guy. So I'm going to move swiftly on from that slide. But see, now you see this slide, and you wish the previous slide had come back, right? Because this is the definition of fun. Fun is a point on the intersection of engagement levels and social interaction for a given activity. So you thought fun was fun, but now you realize when you look into a bit more that fun actually can be quite not fun. And in particular, if fun is your job, and your job is researching fun, it no longer becomes fun. So this is a master's thesis on the subject of fun, and I imagine that the author has terrible experiences at cocktail parties, because she says to people, oh, what do you study? Oh, I study fun. And they say, wow, that's amazing. Tell me about it. And then she says, well, fun is an intersection on the continuum. And then they go, oh, I've just remembered I need to go get a canapé, and that's the end of that. So because when you look into this, there's a lot of detail about fun, and it's not very fun, and it just keeps going on and on and on. So I think fun actually is maybe a bit more like art, that fun when you see it, but you maybe don't want to be reading academic papers about what is fun. So, it's easy to think of things that we do that are fun. So like something novel, super fun. doing something you're good at, that's really satisfying. It feels fun, doesn't it? Completing a task, going with that little Devoxx, that's fun. Fast feedback, really good. So when you do something and you don't hear for 6 months, you're like, what? And when you do something and it goes ding, that's cool. Again, that feeling of making something that's never been made before, that's so cool. Fixing, even, making something new is cool, but it's really satisfying as well when you've got something that's been broken for a while, and then you figure out what was wrong, and you fix it. And it's like, yeah, that's awesome. And all of these things are on the, we've sort of seen so many variations of the Maslow hierarchy, and, this is the original one that doesn't have Wi-Fi at the top. So we've got, the base needs are physiological needs. I need to sleep, I need to eat, that kind of thing. One above that is I need to not be in danger. Then one above that is social, I want that interaction. And then one above that is the esteem. I want that interaction to make me feel good about myself. And then at the very pyramid is this self-actualization. And the fun activities are the ones that are at the top of that pyramid, the ones that make us feel good about ourselves, the ones that are social, the ones that bring us to that state of self-actualization. And what's going on psychologically is it's fairly chemical. So the brain has pleasure centers, and if you do something fun, those pleasure centers get triggered. And again, you can measure this. So this is back from the thesis. And we have a two-dimensional graph. On one level is the engagement level. So if you're really engaged, that's more likely to be fun. On the other side is the social level. So if you're really social, that's more likely to be fun. So the most fun thing is something where you're doing it with other people and it's really engaging. The least fun thing is something that's boring and you're not really interested in it and you're doing it by yourself. And so this was called the Funtinuum. So if you remember one thing from this talk, you can go back and you can say, well, I learned all about the Funtinuum. I can quantify fun. But what does this have to do with Devoxx? What does this have to do with why we're here? Well, it turns out that programming is fun. When you think about how we do our jobs and why we're programmers, really, I think probably most of us got into it because we found it really fun. And I think one of the things that's so nice about programming as an activity is it's both very logical and very creative. So you get that problem-solving buzz, but you also get that I'm making something new, I'm doing something that's never been done before. And that's really cool. There's another aspect of programming too, which is that we get to control stuff. So I think, we all remember that thrill when we did the first Hello World, and you realized that the computer did what you told it to. And then there was the rest of your career where the computer never again did what you told it to. But, you win some, you lose some. And we see this with programming language debates. Often, when people talk about which programming language is the most fun, and they talk about, well, it's so expressive, it's, this one's more productive. But really often underneath, the thing that draws us to a programming language is whether it's fun, whether it feels good to program. And all of those things that we wrap around it, like, oh, well, this one is most expressive, are actually, this one is just most fun to program in. So I'm going to do a quick little survey. So, who here thinks Go is the most fun programming language? One lonely little hand at the back. So shout out as well. Don't just raise your hand. Shout out if you can. Okay. So Java. Any takers for Java? Yeah. And make noise as well. You got to make noise. Yeah. Yay. Cool. Kotlin. Takers for Kotlin? Yeah. Excellent. We've got the Kotlin party in the middle. JavaScript. We have a bit of a middling one for JavaScript. Python? Yeah! So we've got the Python party in the front. Visual Basic? I hated Visual Basic. I did not find it fun. Swift? Any takers for Swift? One lonely little hand, but a very quiet hand for Swift. So I think we've learned two things from this. One is that although this is, originally a Java conference, we're seeing a bit of a split, quite a lot for Kotlin, a bit for JavaScript as well. But the second thing is that making noise is kind of fun as well, right? Like, I think probably the people who made the noise had felt a little bit of fun doing that. And it's because it appeals to that tribalism, it appeals to that social side, because we're in a group and we're making noise, and that feels kind of cool, and we're engaged because we're making noise. But that's actually really different from what a lot of us do in our offices. So in our workplaces, we end up back into this situation where we'd like to be having fun, and it's not at all fun. And the reasons for this have a lot to do with that, management model that we got in the 1980s and then continued using through the 1990s, which is very much command and control. So it's super hierarchical. You've got your org chart. Control's much more important than autonomy, and technology. It's not something that's going to be like adding lots of value to the business. Technology is something that you just have to spend money on in order to keep the lights on. And the origin of this kind of command and control structure actually goes way further back. So it didn't start in the 1980s. It started a long time ago. So the military, sort of interesting, the military were the first large-scale employer. So at the time large militaries were being created, most other industries were done, on a very local level, maybe, a small holding farm or a small landowner with just a couple of employees. And yet you had the military, and all of a sudden you've got, hundreds or thousands of people, and you need to try and figure out how to organize this workforce. And there's an extra wrinkle as well, because what you're asking that workforce to do isn't something like, well, can you make this work in Kotlin, which is kind of enjoyable. It's, could you go kill somebody, and by the way, you might get killed, which is pretty non-enjoyable as an activity. And so then, you do need to have some sort of structures in place that mean that your workforce will do this thing that's fairly unpleasant. And there's another aspect to modern workplaces as well, which has to do with Puritanism. Our cultural values for almost all of us say that fun is wrong, and fun is somehow going to get us into trouble. And if fun doesn't get us into trouble in this life, then it's definitely going to get us into trouble in the afterlife. And so, we sort of feel like, even though we quite like fun, that perhaps it's probably not a super good thing. But in fact, there's a lot of evidence that fun is a good thing, and fun in the workplace in particular is a good thing. So this is IBM's IoT center in Munich, and it is actually that huge. It's a super big building. But the thing that's really interesting about it is that when you go inside, the sign on the wall says you must take the time to play, to be creative. And I just love the fact that they took the time to, make this quite permanent sign with 3D letters and everything that says what we're going to do in this building is we're going to play, because that's really important for the innovation that we want to create. And of course, if you're doing IoT, then I think quite a lot of it feels like play anyway, and that's why so many of us have IoT hobbies and that kind of thing. If you're the IBM IoT center in Munich and you're sharing the building with BMW, then you get significantly better IoT toys than the rest of us. So they've got these all kitted out with IoT things, and they're just dream. But the reason that they're doing that, again, is that there is a lot of research, a lot of really credible research that shows fun is good for business. So, here's one article, another article, another article. You can just sort of build this stack of evidence that says fun's good for business. And in particular, the effect of a fun workplace are that you get less sick leave. So employees are less likely to go off ill because they're having fun at work. They like being there. They're going to work harder. And this is kind of counterintuitive, because you think, well, surely if you're having fun, you're not working. But actually, they work harder. And then what that means is that the combination of the fact that they're there and they're working hard means that the productivity is higher. And this applies to a workplace, and it also applies to individuals. So they can study, rather than looking at the whole workplace, they can look at just individuals and see, well, how does having fun affect an individual? And they found that your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at neutral, negative, or stressed. So you're going to be more productive if you're happy. So far, so good. But then you say, well, how do I get happy? I would be happy if I could, but how do I get there? And especially, how do I get there at work? Well, it turns out that it can be as simple as watching cat videos. Who knew? All talks have to have a cat, and the internet is for cats, so there we go. Because obviously, these really long-term things that you can do in terms of your work environment, in terms of your personal habits, in terms of exercise and getting enough sleep, and not living in a command and control culture, and not being afraid for your job. All of those are really important. But short-term things that we do are also really important. So they did a study, and they found that individuals who had just watched a comedy video, I don't know if it was actually cat videos, but I assume it was, because all comedy videos are cat videos, had approximately 12% greater productivity. So that means that if you watch cat videos at work, you'll be 12% more productive than you were if you didn't watch the cat videos. And why is that? How can that possibly work? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we can't be at 100% all of the time. Your brain needs breaks. It's just like if you go have a shower, you realize how to debug something and what the solution is. The best debugging tool is a good night's sleep. Stepping back and allowing your unconscious to percolate with a problem really helps solve that problem. And the cat video allows you to do the same thing, but in a much more water-efficient way than having a shower. And also, you don't need to worry about how you put the shower in the workplace and what you do for towels, and it all just gets a bit awkward with showers. So you can just have cat videos instead. And there's all sorts of cool breaks that you can have. And they can be just stepping away from your day job and doing something else at work, and then all of a sudden you get better effects. So I don't know if he's here. I think this talk was actually shown at Devoxx a couple of times. Lego trains. Some employers have Lego trains, and they're getting their employees to play together with the Lego trains, not just because Lego trains are cool and everybody loves Lego trains, but because it then creates all sorts of opportunities. So when you do this, then all of a sudden you have something to talk about at conferences, but you also have something to talk about when you're trying to recruit candidates. So you can say, look at our workplace, it's a great place to work. And so they were able to, I think, when they talked about what they were doing going up, they presented these sorts of slides where they said, look, here's the concrete benefits. When they talked to the team about it, they just said, yay, we get to play with Lego trains and work is paying for them, which is cool. But they were also learning, so they took the opportunity of the Lego trains to program the trains with Scala because they wanted to learn Scala, and they didn't want to learn Scala on their business critical production systems, so instead they just did it, on their side project. So far, so good. But of course, you can't be doing all Lego trains at work, and you can't be doing all cat videos at work, or else actually you don't see the productivity benefit because you're not actually working. So how much fun can you realistically expect to have at work? So by the way, the previous picture was one fun guy, and this is lots of fun guy, because it's lots of yay! So I promise you this is the last fun guy joke. And I think there's sort of an intuitive idea that none of us really like working on things that aren't valuable or useful. And so the things that are valuable, and so the things that aren't valuable or useful are not fun, and then the things that are valuable or useful are fun. And then if you take that to its extreme, if we only did fun things at work, well, is that going to work? Well, probably not. We've still got to wash the dishes. We've still got to do these things. And so just because something is fun doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And in particular, just because it's fun for you doesn't mean it's fun for everybody around you. So they've done some studies into internet trolling and, some of the really horrible abuses that you see. And it turns out, which is kind of obvious when you think about it, that the reason that they're doing it is that they find it fun. They're finding it satisfying to, abuse other people on the internet. And so again, fun for them, not fun for the person on the receiving end, probably not a good thing overall. So you've got to think about, well, is everyone in the team having fun? Is this fun for me and creating misery around me? Not so good in a workplace. Is this fun for everybody? Yeah, okay, that's cool. So we had, many years ago, we started to look at Groovy. And in particular, it wasn't really a collective decision. We had one employee who really wanted to learn Groovy. And so we needed to do a whole bunch of test scripting and that kind of thing. And so he did it in Groovy. And he thought this was great. He learned Groovy. It was really satisfying. This was 10 years ago. Groovy was really cool. But then a problem happened, because then he left the company. And none of the rest of us knew Groovy. We all had, quite a lot of deadlines and that kind of thing. And so we were looking at this pile of Groovy code. And before we could do anything to continue on with our day job, we all had to learn Groovy. So that was a case where fun for him, not so much fun for everybody. And, so maybe it wasn't the most responsible way of having done it. So really, fun's like beer. You want to enjoy it. It can have benefits, but you want to enjoy it responsibly. So how do you go about getting fun? What are the steps? And again, I should say, this is my experience. This is what I've seen work. It's going to be different in every workplace. So the first thing, and this is super important, is to find the unfun things and get rid of them. And actually, there's an earlier first step, which is, I didn't realize I needed this, and then after I gave this talk, a couple of people came up to me and said, let me tell you about my workplace. And I thought, oh, okay, yes. So someone spoke to me, and it was the saddest story. He said that they had a workplace culture where people would bring in cake, and then they'd send an email to the team saying, oh, look, there's cake in the kitchen. And HR went to them and said, you have to stop sending emails that there's cake. And it was never entirely clear to me what the reason was, but I think it was something about like misusing staff, business resources in order to share cake. It was just weird, but it was just sad. And he left that company, which I was really happy about, because if your office tells you to stop telling your colleagues that you have cake, it is not a happy office. So this was another one where they were a distributed team, and they were doing support and service. So it was quite a tough job. And what they would do is at 5:30, this was many years ago when this sort of made sense. At 5:30, they'd clock off, and they'd use the office network, and they'd play Doom, or Quake rather. And so then what they got told is, if you're in the office after 5:30, you need to be doing work. So these Quake tournaments were really, really good for the team, right? Because they were a distributed team, but they were having the opportunity to interact with each other in a non-worky way. They were growing as a team. They were bonding. It was in their own time, and yet they got told that they couldn't be in the office in their own time in order to talk to their colleagues, which is just so sad. So not a very healthy office culture. But going back to step one rather than step zero, which is get rid of the unfun things. If a process is unfun, that's usually a red flag that it's not adding value. Because if we could see the value for it, we'd probably find it kind of fun. So if it's not fun, it's not guaranteed. It could be like washing the dishes, but that's something to look at to say, oh, is this actually this process adding value, or is it just waste? So there's a lot of not fun things that we tend to have in our workplaces, so meetings, criticism, that kind of thing. One of the things we've done with the Garage method is we've tried to look at a lot of these and figure out, well, are there alternatives to these, other ways to fix this? So, pair programming is a really good way of getting that feedback on your code rather than code reviews. I really like no estimates instead of planning poker, because I find planning poker quite unfun. Let's streamline our process. Instead of having status reporting, let's get the status to generate itself so we don't have to do all that boring status reporting. Getting interrupted can be not very nice, so let's make sure that we sort of create a bubble around the pairs so that we say we're not going to interrupt you while you're working. Looking for documentation drives me crazy, so let's make our documentation findable so that we don't have to just keep asking other people how to do things. Let's get feedback quickly. let's not do a 2-year project. Let's do a minimum viable product, figure out if we're on the right track, get that feedback, and then go on it. And again, autonomy. So we want the teams to be self-directing. You don't want this command and control structure because that doesn't feel really good. So this is a bugbear of mine, but making things findable is so much more fun than having to look. But another really important one is about programming, because all of us got into this industry because we liked programming. And yet now, probably a lot of us don't actually necessarily spend that much time programming. So Jessalyn Rose, she did a little Twitter survey of how much time most of us spend programming. And about 75% spend less than half our time programming, even though we're programmers. So how does that work? What are we doing with the rest of the time, and can we fix it? So I looked at that and I thought, oh, I'm really not spending a lot of time programming. That's really sad. So then that sort of made me think, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get rid of the stuff that stops me doing what I really enjoy, which is the programming. So I went to my management team and I said, we're short-staffed. You're going to need to cancel all my meetings for a month so I can be programming. And the cool thing is it worked. So I spent a month doing nothing but programming, and it was really cool. Interactions, working with our colleagues, doing something together is fun. In general, interruptions are not. So what some teams do is they'll have a whole bunch of protected pairs, but then they'll know that questions do need to get asked. People do need help. And so they'll designate a pair as the interrupt pair. And that pair, it rotates round. And you know that if you're in the interrupt pair, probably you're going to get interrupted a lot. But at least you're protecting the rest of the team from interruption. So that can be a good way of managing that requirement to have interruptions with the more general thing that you want to get into the zone and be programming. Managing meetings is really, really important. So if there's a lot of meetings building up in the schedule, that's going to be a killer for productivity and also probably a killer for workplace enjoyment. So because we're pair programming, that gives us a really good lever to use against meetings, because we say, well, I'm pair programming, so if you interrupt me, you're also interrupting my pair, and so I'm afraid I just can't go to this meeting. You'll just have to not have meetings. And it actually works really well. So we have, an iteration planning meeting at the beginning of the week. We have a retro at the end of the week. We have stand-up, and that's all. And it's cool. I want to say more on pair programming as well, because I think this is a really important thing, because it's nice in itself. But then what's most nice about it is the fact that it eliminates the need for code review. Because code review is not much fun for the person who's doing the code review. And it's not much fun for the person who's getting the code review, who's getting their code criticized. Because it happens after the code is written, it tends to not really find many fundamental problems, because it's too horrible to go to someone and say, actually, I think your approach isn't right and you should have done something different 3 days ago. So it sort of ends up being this waste of time where you bike shed over, well, I don't like the positioning of your semicolon there, and the real problems aren't actually getting caught, and it takes a lot of time, and it slows down that whole value chain. I have limited patience with estimation. I find they're rarely accurate, and the meetings to do them take a long time and involve a lot of discussion. So I really like just assuming that if we size our story, or if we construct our stories correctly, they'll probably all average out to about 1 point, and then we're done. And then we can just move on and actually start writing them and get our feedback that way about whether we're on the right track. One thing we talk about a lot is the process of getting something into production. All that stuff like adding logging, can that ever be fun? Well, possibly not, but it is satisfying to know that it's a bit like washing the dishes. It's satisfying to know that what you're doing is going to make a difference, and it's going to allow the thing you've done to be used for real. So, that's cool. Having things become real is fun. And as well, observability matters. We know we're going to have a horrible, unfun thing later on if we have a problem, unless we've done this work. So. But I think as well, it is really important to think that prototyping feels kind of fun, but it's only fun if something actually becomes real. So a lot of companies have innovation departments now. And I think one sort of anti-pattern that we're starting to see is that the innovation departments do tons and tons of stuff, and they're all prototypes, and then none of them actually become real. And so then there's a disconnect between the innovation department and what users are getting the benefit of, and that's not so much fun. TDD I really like because it makes code testable, because it makes you think about the design, but testing shouldn't be part of the hardening phase. So testing has to be something that you do throughout. And doing it with TDD, I think, has a few benefits. One is that your testing is more comprehensive. But the other really cool thing about TDD, I think, is it's actually quite a fun way of testing, because it gives you that little gratification. You know, you've got the red, and then you make the red go green. And it's like, yay, you know, that triggers that little pleasure center. Automation is super fun, and this is, you know, we have a really good opportunity that in 100 years we may not have, which is that computers don't expect to have fun. When they all rise up, you know, they'll come to us and they'll say, "Why did you give me all these boring tasks?" Well, sorry, I didn't know you wanted to have fun. So anything that's tedious, people hate, computers love. Give the boring jobs to the computer. And this has an extra bonus, which is that automating stuff is really fun. So we get the fun of the automation, and then we never have to do the boring thing, so that's cool. Status reporting, manual status reporting, very boring. Make sure that stories are small, so that the status is self-reporting. You don't need to ask anybody how far through the story are you, because you know the story's small. And daily stand-ups are a really good idea. When they become like half-hour stand-ups, they're not a really good idea anymore. That's not fun. Even if, you know, some of the people are really engaged, there's going to be some people who are in that conversation going, "Why am I listening to this meeting? I could be doing something else." So if your stand-ups are more than like 5-10 minutes, then that's a warning sign of like, we need to figure out another flow here. Autonomy is super important as well. Everybody hates being told what to do. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, I think, just because most of us are stubborn and don't like being told what to do. But often as well, what really frustrates us when someone tells us what to do is we've got more context than they do. We know the domain better than them. And so we know what they're telling us to do is wrong. So if you let teams make their own decisions, the quality of the decision-making improves and people are happier. So once you've done all that, got rid of a whole bunch of unfun from the process, then you can start to actually add the fun. And children learn through play, and we have this idea that like if you're a child and you're learning, you expect to play, and if you're an adult and you're learning, you shouldn't expect to play. Well, no, adults learn through play too. So, and you know, again, this is something that's really extensively studied, and there's a couple of ways of having that kind of fun educational experience. So one is play, which is just really unfocused. One is exploration, where you've got something that you don't really know, and you're sort of working through to try and figure out what it is. Work has a goal, and games have a goal, but also that aspect of play and exploration. So, you know, plays for its own sake, exploration is an investigation, work has a goal, games have a goal, and rules. All of these have their place. Obviously, work is the least fun, and you can achieve really good learning outcomes with the others. So about 2 years ago, gamification was everywhere, and everybody was talking about gamification. I think it's sort of quieted down a little bit, but the principles are still really good. So a lot of the tools that we now use are gamified. So the reason Stack Overflow is so much better than any of the other forums that went before it is because it had that element of gamification. And so by giving people points for good answers and for good questions, you rewarded the behavior that you wanted to see, and it became really good. We do security training in IBM. And I love it because one of the things that they do is, you know, it's delivered by a website, but it's not like you get the website and then, you know, you have a quiz and then you have to click. What you have to do in order to pass the security training is you have to hack the website. So for each exercise, there's a vulnerability in the website. You need to find that vulnerability, do the thing, and then you'll get marked as complete. Again, TDD is super gamified. TDD is gamified quality. Build status as well, you know, that that's something that really lends itself to gamification. So you can have, your build radiator, you can have, your build LED. Some of this gets really quite productionized. So this is the Siren of Shame, which is like an actual thing that you can buy. I'm never quite sure how serious it is, because the more you read it, the more strange it gets. But it's got, it's got like reputation and all of these things that you can do with the Siren of Shame. A couple of years ago as well, we started to see gamified recruitment. So there was these things where, like, the US Army had a game, and if you did really well on the game, then they'd sort of reach out to you and say, oh, by the way, since you're so good at the Army game, maybe you'd be good at real Army as well. And Uber had a thing where you'd get into the back of a taxi, and if the driver thought you looked like a likely candidate, they'd sort of give you this sort of test quiz thing as you were a passenger, and if you did well on that, then you'd sort of get through, and Uber would reach out to you. So all of that's, it's got the goal. You can see as a business, well, why would we gamify recruitment? Oh, because, look, we're going to get recruits. But I don't want to underestimate the value of just play, because that's so important as well. And another way of thinking about play, and the way it really manifests itself for a lot of us, is just as this quirkiness. So we see things and they're sort of charming and they're sort of quirky, and they have something that has no purpose other than just because it's nice. So the Liberty team, they had a site called WASDev, and on it, you can see they've got this cute little logo at the bottom, and if you hover over it, you get the expansion that it's peace, love, and play. And I think it's so nice because they didn't have to put that in, but they just thought, yeah, we're here, we're writing an application server for the purpose of peace, love, and play. Easter eggs are sort of a similar thing, and you can't read it, but this article is quite funny because it sort of lists some cool Easter eggs, but the explanation it gives for Easter eggs is that programmers' lives are so miserable and their jobs are so horrible that the only way they can relieve the misery and tedium of their job is by writing the Easter eggs, which I don't think is quite right, and I don't think that's how Easter eggs happen, but maybe some are. And so there's, Google search has a lot of them. So for example, if you type tic-tac-toe, you can get an actual little game of tic-tac-toe, and there's all sorts of others in Google search. But there's some quite old ones as well. So did anybody have a Next computer? A couple of hands. They were beautiful. So they were masterpieces of engineering, just in terms of the beauty of the hardware. But there were some really cool things in them as well. So they were one of the first. Well, in fact, they were the first Linuxy GUI system. And so it had a dictionary in it, and the dictionary had pictures, which was cool. But there was a really cool feature, which is that, I don't know if it's the same joke internationally, but there's, sort of a joke that you'll tell someone, oh, did you know that gullible's not in the dictionary? And if they go, oh, really? I didn't know that. Then they're gullible, and it's, And so what they did is that if you looked up gullible in the Next dictionary, it would look at your user profile, get the picture of you from your user profile, and instead of showing a tiger, it would show you, because you'd obviously been, drawn to look up gullible in the dictionary. And, we see the same sort of things, on a smaller scale with like our Slack ops. So we've got a release train, and because it's a train, they sort of went through and they had like a little fat controller character from Thomas the Tank Engine. And then if the release is going off, it says choo choo, rather than saying something like the release is, preparing to be built. We had a 4th birthday in the garage a couple of months ago, and so we brought in cake, and the cake was blue because it was the blue mix, and just these little things that are just nice. But with all of that, all of that stuff that you can add, but the reason that stuff is nice is it wasn't like the Next management went to the Next team and said, we need to have more quirkiness in our operating system. You're tasked with figuring out how to make this fun, right? It was something that I assume, just came organically from the team. It was the same with our blue cake. It was the same with that release train. And if you make fun mandatory, then pretty much by definition you've failed. So there's a study that says 31% of us dislike team building activities. That's an American study. I suspect for Europe, the proportion is way, way higher, right? We don't want to be told that we have to have fun. And so, making people do things that they don't want to do and then calling it fun, it's not. There's yeah. And so then that becomes this sort of management question, like with a lot of things. You say, well, if fun is good, but I'm not measuring fun, how do I know my team are having fun? How do I know I'm getting the value of fun? And really, at that point, it's one of those things where you have to say, no, you just got to trust it. You've just got to let it happen. You've got to create the environment that enables fun, but you cannot force the fun. Because when you force the fun, you get things like this. So there was, again, this is just a story on the internet, but they had an office party, but they took attendance at the office party, which already is, it's like, yes, here's your wonderful opportunity. We're going to, give you hot dogs, and you're going to have fun. And if you don't have fun, there's going to be trouble, right? And as well, people who, they were shift workers, and so people whose shift it wasn't still had to turn up to the office party for the mandatory fun, even though they weren't at work, and because it was at one of the boss's houses as well, I think they didn't want the grubby employees actually using their toilets. So there was no facilities at this 5-hour party where attendance was mandatory. So that is how to fail at fun. But really as well, like the most important thing, the key way to fail at fun is if you have the ball pit, if you have the party, but you still have the command and control structure, and you still have all of the meetings, and you still have all of the other stuff, then your fun efforts are going to fail, no matter how much layer of fun and, how many word of the day and chief fun officer and all of that you put in. So what was really noticeable about The Office and David Brent was, he wanted to be fun, and he kept putting like this layer of fun on top of things, but it was just a horrible workspace. And so that layer of fun, it wasn't even like it made the workspace less horrible, it made the workspace more horrible. Because if it's not fun, it doesn't matter how much fun you have on top. And one last thing as well is which I find quite interesting, is what about things that are inherently fun? Are they inherently fun at work? And so you imagine that, if you got paid to do something that everybody else is paying to do, that would be the most amazing thing. And so then you go and you look up jobs as a games tester, and you think this is going to be amazing. And then you actually talk to people who work in the games industry, and you realize that it's really not. And it's actually a pretty terrible job, and the working conditions are horrible. And even though there's games involved, that doesn't make it fun. Another thing that can go wrong with fun is that even if you know the theory, sometimes there's a gap between theory and reality. So you have all these good intentions to have fun, but then it doesn't go wrong. And so we have an internal feedback system, and one of the people in my team left me this feedback, which you can't really read. But the key thing is that I'm speaking on fun, I'm writing on fun, I am a professional funster, and yet the feedback that I got was, yeah, Holly works too hard. Holly needs to go play more pool, and she needs to be just chilling a bit. So even though I know the theory, what I was actually doing in practice was different. So finally, just to conclude, fun is really important. It's got business benefit, it helps productivity, it helps retention, it matters, even though it seems like sort of a dirty word. And to get fun, the first thing to do, get rid of the unfun things. That's the most important bit. Once you've done that, then you can go through and you can add the fun things. And with that, I'll stop. So thank you very much. So I've got a minute and a half, and there's coffee outside, so I'm happy to answer questions up here.